welcome to SIM-PAC Live. I'm your host, Geoff Matthews, and today we have Angela Richardson from Eucalypt Consulting. Angela is a leadership and change expert, and she works across the entire supply chain, companies big and small, and we're going to talk about being bold, leading change today. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Geoff. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, firstly, being bold. What does that mean? What are the traits of a leader or a successful leader that is bold?
Yeah, I think it's a good question and important to define it, because I think sometimes we can misinterpret what it actually means. For me, anyway, and in terms of what I've seen, success in leadership, there's a few things. It's about taking calculated risks, but those risks based on sound judgment. So it's not about being reckless. Bold leadership is also about being confident enough to value the input of others, and that could be your team or other broader stakeholders. It's not about arrogance. It's more about, how you connect with people to create environments of creativity and innovation. Bold leaders are strategic and they're considered in their approach, and they're not impulsive. And they have a clear vision for the future that motivates and inspires other people. And they're also persistent and resilient. So when they face challenges and setbacks, which are inevitable in our working life, and particularly probably for your audience who are looking to make pretty significant changes in their particular industries, bold leaders need to be able to respond to those challenges and setbacks in a positive way. And that's about being action and as opposed to inaction, and not being afraid to make tough, possibly unpopular decisions. And the final point there is around empowering teams. So, and that's about inspiration and not dominance. So, enabling and empowering your team to be autonomous and empowering them and building them up to be able to do the things that they need to do to deliver for your business.
Perfect. Look, I made some notes. I'll put them up on screen in this video, but to sum up, you were saying, that bold leaders take calculated risks, confident enough to value the input, considered and strategic, persistent and resilient. I'm just smiling because I think that's me. I don't know if all of them are. and they empower teams to be confident and autonomous.
Yeah.
Really, really great points. And are the traits of successful bold leaders? What are the behaviours of those leaders?
Yeah, there's lots of behaviours that underpin the traits that we just talked about. But I sort of, in my experience, I've kind of whittled it down to probably three main traits three main behaviours, I should say. And the first is, it's all about paying attention. So this is about getting out of yourself as the leader and looking outward to the people around you that you're depending on to deliver or make change. So paying attention is important because everyone, including your team and your stakeholders, need to be heard and acknowledged. So you don't have to agree with what people are saying, but it is important to ask questions and listen and acknowledge the views and contributions of others. Now, we'll say that if you're looking for those individuals, whether they're team members or other stakeholders, to actually make a change that will benefit you, I think it's they're more likely to accept what you're asking them to do if they've played a part in the design or the identification of the problem or the design of the solution or any other decisions around the change. So
Yeah, I like to say that they can see a bit of themselves in the solution or what you're trying to do.
exactly.
So any bit of feedback that it might have been yours to start with, but if they've given to you, demonstrate it's theirs and you've helped them buy in.
And to take a step further, letting them know that their feedback has had that input and showing them how that is the case, because I've seen many examples of where leaders have taken on board a lot of feedback, but they don't communicate that that's what they've done, and then people don't feel heard, if that makes sense. So being really explicit about the fact that you're listening, that you're taking on board the feedback, and hey, here's the feedback that I've taken on board, and these are the decisions or the changes that I've made based on what you've said.
Yeah, it's a very fine line between somebody giving you an idea and acknowledging that your idea might have stimulated the formation of a policy, which is slightly different, but they can see themselves in it versus you not telling them and they say, oh my God, they didn't listen. They stole my idea and they watered it down.
Yeah, there's a little subtle dance and play around those things, but
Yes.
the key point is the acknowledgement bit, acknowledging.
Yes.
And to acknowledge, you have to listen. So paying attention. The next one is being clear. So look, the world at the moment is chock full of information and difficult decisions. So whatever you can do in your business environment with your stakeholders, your team or others, to simplify your message and be clear and simple in your communication, the easier it will be for your people to get on board with what you have to say and what you need them to do. So the key there is to not overcomplicate. Don't provide more information than they need. Be ready to talk about the change in a clear and consistent way in any format, in any forum,
Yes.
team meeting, conference call, an elevator conversation, a water cooler conversation, out of the street, whatever. So be really clear in your mind about what those key messages. Someone says, oh, what's happening here? What's going on with X? That you're ready to answer in a clear and simple way about what it's all about, why we're doing it, and what's going to happen.
Yes. Yes, I spent 10 years in politics, and one of the things we learnt was when to say your statement and then don't say anything more. Because if you keep trying to explain it, the reporters will report the last thing you said, which was completely a jumbled way of putting it.
Keeping it simple and then stopping and just letting, them sort of provide a bit of commentary and, listening to them at that point, because you'll get an insight into whether your message has actually hit home or not, which is important to check. And then the third behavior there is around being predictable. So this is all about saying what you're going to do, which you've done now. You've been clear, and now do what you've said. And repeat that over and over again. Say what you're going to do and do what you've said. And then the third step actually is to say what you've done, which is that reinforcing and connecting people, your actions to the strategy that you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
And as part of that, saying what you're going to do, try not to overcommit so that you can actually do. Like, don't set yourself unrealistic expectations that we're going to do this, that, and the other when you know you can't deliver on that. So there's that old saying, under promise, over deliver. I think that sort of applies here. So working to realistic timeframes and outcomes. And look, at the end of the day, if you make a mistake, if you don't deliver something that you said you would, that's okay. Just communicate that, and people will be forgiving. But if you ignore it, if you sort of sweep it under the carpet, nothing to see here, people pick it up, and then that erodes the trust. This is all about trust, by the way. Saying what you're going to do, doing it, and then reminding people that you've done it. That builds trust. And when you have trust, you have people who will follow you and are more likely to get on board with whatever you're trying to do.
Yes. And what about, I've got a question here about resourcing and resourcing change. And this comes in is when leaders are saying, okay, we're going to go and do this. And there's a big sigh, collective sigh from the workforce going, well, how the hell we can't do today's job. How are we going to go and do that? I call this funding it for success or funding it for failure.
Yeah.
Also remembering a lot of changes comes from pressure, competitive pressure in the marketplace. And sometimes there isn't a lot of spare cash around. So have you seen good examples of people funding stuff for success or restructuring stuff so they can resource it, or it could even be people resource it or supporting the people to do it, and examples of where that hasn't happened and so the change hasn't been effective at all?
Yeah, look, I think resourcing is just a critical point and a critical element to success. You've got to give yourself the time and space to think about the strategy that you're going to use to implement whatever change. Assess the landscape, what's going on out there, who might be on board, who might not be on board, and really get prepared to manage the resistance that you might get. And that takes time and thought, and sometimes it takes skills as well that you might not have within your organisation. So getting someone to help, particularly at the front end of a project, so that you know what you're heading into, what resistance you're going to get, the people that you need to engage with, how this links back into your business strategy, or a strategy for the industry, for example. Being really clear on that stuff before you even do anything else with your stakeholders, I think is critical, and having someone help you with that if you don't feel you can do that on your own is really important. Where I've seen, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, I heard you, and I may have jumped in with a question too early, but when I heard you speak at SIM-PAC Live Queensland, you talked about You talked about an intersection of. I've made some notes. So I'll check them. You talked about the intersections of systems, teams, and strategy. And can you? And it's just where we've rolled into. Can you pick it up from there and talk about that?
Yeah. And that's what I was just, exactly. So the strategic element is really important, and to be clear on how this, whatever you're trying to do, links back into your organizational industry strategy, etc. And the more that you can connect it with what other people are doing, the better. The second component there that I talked about at SIM-PAC was systems. So ensuring that you have systems in place that are going to be able to enable you to make those changes, and having a simple process, for example, around how you make change is good, because often with change projects you'll have a few different people involved in them. You might have a designer, you might have a project lead, you might have some change support, and then you might have leaders or others who are communicating the change. So really important to have a process in place for how you're going to go about doing this, and then also some good habits and behaviours. And I think we talked about before, previously, Geoff, about having a system of continuous improvement in your organization. I think that's a great idea. And if you've got that, you can leverage that system for bigger changes that you might need to implement. And then the third component there is your people capability. So you need your strategy, you need your systems to execute, and then you need the people capability element, which is the resourcing that we talked about before. Have you got people with the right skills to execute this change? And that's not just about managing the change, but also communicating it, engaging with your stakeholders, drafting communications, and then there's, at the end of the line, the people that are receiving or impacted by the change. What kind of attitudes are they bringing to the scenario? So have they got continuous improvement growth mindset, or are they stuck in their ways and not interested in changing? And those things can be quite challenging if you're trying to make some fairly significant change. But ultimately, all of this, the strategy, the systems, and the capability is what we're trying to do here is achieve change in a way that minimizes any dip in productivity. It minimizes disruption to your service or product delivery. It minimizes any rollbacks or people reverting to old behaviors or habits or old systems. And what you want is those people that are engaged as part of this change to, well, hopefully be more engaged and be more likely to be working for you or connected with you in some way as a result of this project. What you don't want is people to walk away from their interaction with you and say, oh, wow, I don't really want to be involved. I'm not interested in staying in this organization because I don't get it. Or I'm disengaged and I'm going to turn up to work, but, I'm not really engaged in what I'm doing.
So in coming to that point, engaged, disengaged, how important is selling the vision and the dream, if you like? Obviously, a lot of these companies are driven from the top, and they might be a vision of the CEO or the founder who are got a completely different set of priorities from somebody who may, want to go home at 5:30 at night and spend the time with their family and doing sport and other things in their life. How important is selling that dream in, or are there horses for courses, and you can motivate people, you find out what motivates them and then push those buttons?
Yeah, I mean, very important. It's a big question. There's lots of things that go into engagement and getting people on board with what you're trying to do. Just thinking about the word selling, I wouldn't phrase it in terms of selling, because that kind of, feels like then you have to be a salesperson, and there's not many people that enjoy being a salesperson. So I think you've obviously, as the founder of an organization or the leader of an organization, you will already have a lot of enthusiasm and energy around, the direction you want to take your organization. And you need to communicate that. That's contagious. People will come on board if they can see the why. And I've talked about the why in a few different spots in our conversation. But if people understand, why you're doing what you're doing, you're going to find that they're more likely to, join up with you and be engaged. You do need to be mindful that engagement and commitment to your organization is going to be different for different people. Because you're always going to have you're always going to be probably the most engaged employee, because, this is your business, this is your baby, You want to
Yes.
see success. You're very motivated, but not everyone's going to have that same level, and you've got to understand and respect that. But
Yeah.
when people are at work, you want them to be fully engaged and motivated and, productive. So
Yes.
that's where you can, really, how do you engage your people when they are at work, whether they're working from home or not? It doesn't matter where they are, but how do you engage them? How do you communicate with them? How do you involve them in decisions? Um, how do you be clear about what you're asking them to do, and the contribution and the importance of the contribution that they're making to the bigger picture goal and strategy?
Good point. What about change fatigue? I mean, the
Yeah.
world's changing all the time. Do you find that sometimes people have made it really difficult to implement change in their business because they've done it badly in the past and they've still got unfinished change? And especially when founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs are really great at starting stuff and not very good at tidying it up and finishing it. So you go into organisation and they were meant to implement a new accounting system. It still hasn't been embedded in, and they're going to get another one. Do you see that in organisations?
All the time. So you've mentioned sort of three points in that one question. One is about the fatigue. Yep, we're all fatigued, and I mentioned that before. We are bombarded with information and decisions all the time, and changes, like your iPhone upgrades, and you go, okay, how do I work this this new version, or your Android. You're getting notifications from your bank about the terms and conditions are changing. Should I be up to that? The insurance rolls around, and oh, should I stay with my current insurer or should I change? So we're just bombarded with a million things to do, and more so than ever, and nothing seems simple anymore. So as a leader, be mindful of that, and that's why I sort of spoke before about being clear and being simple in your messages. So I know you've got a lot going on in your mind about what needs to happen, and your vision, but dumb it down or simplify it so that the people that are receiving that, who are receiving 10 million other messages in their day, your
Mm.
message is to be the one that's really clear and simple, and people know what they need to do as a result of it. So be the one thing in their working life that is easy. Try and make it easy for people. People will change when it's easy. The other point, what was the other point that you made?
I said about fatigue, but also unfinished
Unfinished
change
change.
from
Yeah,
last time. It's still
yeah, and
untidy, and that they're wanting more change.
that's that really important point, because that leads into that trust. So if people have seen that change has been implemented poorly, and then you go out and try and sell another piece of change, you've already started on a low level of engagement, most likely. You've got to work doubly hard to get them back on board. So that phase, which is kind of the third point I was thinking of when you were speaking, is the embedding phase of change. So making sure that whatever you're doing sticks. Um, and that's about reinforcing over time. So rewarding and recognizing people who are doing the right thing. It's about making sure you're embedding it into your systems and processes, making sure that if there are accountabilities that need to be redefined, or roles that need to be redefined because we've got maybe this new system that's come on board, then you need to do those things, all of those reinforcement activities, because if you don't, it's very likely that the change, all of the effort that you've done to make that change, is going to be wasted, because they'll go back and to habits. And this is human behavior, is that we want the predictability, and we want things actually to stay the same. So
Yeah.
it is hard to make changes, especially if it's someone else telling you to make a change, not something that you're motivated yourself.
And just going back to the unfinished change from last time, would you recommend that the leaders, accept that it was their fault? Because it's easy to lay blame for everything, but you got to look at the reasons why the change wasn't finished off properly and was ineffective. Has to go back to them. And so, would you recommend that the leaders say, "Look, it was our fault.
Yeah.
We didn't do it properly. We want to do this
Yeah.
one better."
Yeah, look, I
Is that
think
a route?
going back to my first behaviour, acknowledge. If you're
Acknowledge.
getting the feedback, if you're getting the feedback that, that didn't work, and acknowledge the feedback and say, look, as a leader, I hear you. I can see that approach didn't work. I can see that we didn't get the results that we wanted. And look, I'll take responsibility for that.
Yes.
And more importantly, this is what we're going to do differently next time,
Yes. Be better,
and then do it.
and then do it.
Yeah.
And you would only have to do it once to show the trust, because there's nothing like a bounce back story, a redemption story.
Yeah, exactly.
We like that.
And it's that's about being humble as a leader. You don't have to have the answers, and people don't expect you to have all the answers, and you don't have to be the expert in everything. That's okay. But the importance is, those behaviors, listening, paying attention to people, being predictable, and being clear in your messaging. Just really, really important.
Right. Angela, look, I know we could talk for hours and delve a lot deeper into this, but I think we'll leave it there. We've got you finished off with what I was wanting to give us the things you should focus on, the important things to focus on. If you can focus on those things, then you can start to work your way through. And also engaging leadership change managers like yourself. I think that's important. I think that if you're not a change expert yourself in a business, get one in, because there's a lot of integration of systems, teams, and strategy that requires somebody else to have a look at as well. Because I know you bring lots of frameworks and lots of things to help teams, and those are useful, and they won't have them at their fingertips. So I will put your contact details on the end of this video. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you at SIM-PAC Live Western Australia and maybe even South Australia if we can get you there.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'm going to do my darndest to get there, and I look forward to meeting your audience as well.
Okay, and if anyone wants to get in touch with Angela, her contact details are going to follow. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thanks, Geoff. I've had a fun time talking with you about all of this. It's good
Wonderful
stuff.